Hello,
Hi.
everybody. I'm so excited. We are gonna just kill a couple of seconds here so that we can give people kind of time to shuffle
Put
in.
the pants on.
Yeah,
Get
exactly.
ready for
Put
the
the
day.
sunglasses on. Well, that brings up like a funny thing to talk about is like, are you in the office or are you not in the office right now?
I'm actually not in the office today
So do you
because I did not feel like putting proper pants on. So
good? I'm like, I just was
today's the day.
the other day who I was like, yeah, if you are on a conference call in your own house and you are not wearing like sweatpants or leggings or
Yeah.
something like that,
No,
you can,
I've got the full Zoom mullet going on. It's like business on top. I've got my athleisure like party on the bottom.
that's so
So
great. I was like, I feel ridiculous then when I get up to get coffee or something because
yeah.
it's totally like sweater. And then on the
Yeah.
bottom, wait, look at
Yeah.
terrible sweatpants. They're like 3 sizes too big men's sweatpants.
Oh,
So anyway, okay, that's enough time for killing. uh, Welcome to the Cackle, everybody. This is Entry Point's weekly interview series highlighting small businesses, startups, and the people that are making an impact on our communities. And today we're talking about the rise of the rest, emerging startup ecosystems. And so, as always, if you have any comments, you can feel free to drop them in the comment section and we can kind of see them pop up, or if you have any questions or anything, and we'll try to address those. So joining us today is Anna Mason, and she's with Revolution's Rise of the Rest Seed Fund, and I'm so excited!
I'm so pumped to be back, to see you, even though we're virtual. It's been a minute. It's been a minute since we were last together. So thank you for having me on today.
I dug up this picture that I had of us that you might have seen on social media, but we were like, it was basically looked like, and it was like, that was our faces together. And I just saw the picture. I was like, do you remember when people's faces used to be that close? And then that was
totally wait, I'll go this way here.
Yeah.
As close as we're going to get these days.
Yeah. And then it was like totally fine. There was no threat of anything. Like, it was just like, whatever.
Yeah.
So I was like looking through your bio and like, I feel like I was already very impressed by you. And then I'm like, holy crap. Like, you're very intelligent. I thought you were intelligent before. And then I like went through and I was like, you've done many things. How do you look this good at 75 years of age? So how have you accomplished all these things?
Very good.
So went BA in government from Harvard. I was like, okay, you should just tell
me. That's code for I used to not be able to do math in my head.
And then
your career in finance has changed that, I hope.
It's funny because I feel like I got worse at math after I started like doing math in my head and stuff, because I used to like be more into like calculus and stuff. Anyway, whatever. And then I'm like, calculators, I love them. And then you have your MBA from NYU, Stern School of Business. I was like, that's so great. I also just saw you were in Fortune Magazine's 40 Under 40. That's very fancy. And you've been sort of on Wall Street. You've started a company, a fitness app, which I thought was really cool. That was acquired by Beachbody, which is the one that does that insanity workout, right?
They're like the OG P90X.
Yeah. I was like, man, I've never done one of those.
Yeah.
But kudos to people that are like in quarantine being like, I'm totally doing the insanity workout every morning. And I'm like,
that's not me.
I am not doing that.
Yeah, that's not me.
That is not happening. And now you are with Revolution, and it's really cool. You do so many things, like you're investing through the seed fund, but then you also plan the annual Rise of the Rest tour, which seems like it must be the most insane undertaking of all time.
It is inspiring, fun, and completely insane. Yes, but amazing, and we wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.
The briefing memos that you must have on every detail of that trip must be so insane.
Yeah. I'm
like, oh my gosh. So I guess while traveling around to different entrepreneurial communities for Rise of the Rest, what do you see as kind of like the strengths of the communities? Because you guys focus mostly on like the non-coast, like kind of emerging tech ecosystems across the country. Like, what do you find like the strengths to be of those communities, and why do you guys focus on that?
Sure. Well, taking a little bit of a step back to maybe explain Rise of the Rest as a baseline, because I think that really goes a long way in terms of answering the question. The headline for us with Rise of the Rest is that we see opportunity first through the lens of geography. So what does that headline mean? In the venture capital community, which has grown pretty tremendously over the last 10 years. I think it's been like something like a 10x in terms of the amount of funding that's gone into the entire industry in the US. We're now sitting, sort of straddling either side of $100 billion that gets invested every year into startups all across the country in the US. Incredible number. But when you peel back the layers of the onion behind that number, you find that not all startup communities are created equal in terms of access to that capital. So 75% of that venture capital goes to three places: California, New York, and Massachusetts. And those have been the pretty sobering stats when it comes to geography for the last handful of years. And it's equally sobering, as I think we both probably know, when it comes to female founders. Less than 10% of venture capital goes to female founders. Even worse when you look at the makeup when it comes to race. Far less than 1% of venture capital goes to Black founders. And so when we kind of go view from 30,000 and we look at the entire landscape, for us, there are direct and indirect connections to access to venture capital and the opportunity to build a high growth startup, and how that ties not only to net new job creation, but also to this spirit of possibility and ingenuity and literally making the impossible possible. And every community in the country deserves that fair shot. And so that was really the baseline foundation that actually, even before we had a fund. So if you look at Rise of the Rest today, we have 300 million under management to invest in early stage companies. We're currently invested in 150 companies across about 70 cities. We were very early on investing out of our second fund, so we have a lot more work to do, a lot more phenomenal companies to back and partner with. But that's against the backdrop, both of our parent company, Revolution, where we also have two older sibling funds, Revolution Ventures and Revolution Growth. So all told, we have about $1.7 billion under management. We're investing at all stages all across the country. And then there's also this Rise of the Rest platform, and you mentioned the tours. And so that work dates back to 2014. It was an effort launched by Revolution's chairman and CEO, Steve Case, who's pretty well known as the co-founder and CEO of AOL, America Online, which scaled right here in our own backyard here in DC. If you could see my backyard here. So to come full circle on this, before we launched our fund, we launched this initiative and really this call to action to other partners, community organizers, leaders, investors, entrepreneurs, to say, let's recognize, celebrate, spotlight, and learn more about the front lines of innovation and entrepreneurship all across the country. Mm-hmm. That materialized in the somewhat crazy bus tour that you referenced. So we take a campaign tour bus. There's nothing political about what we do. It's really important. We go to 5 cities. Yeah, we go to 5 cities in 5 days, and we do about 60 hours of programming. That typically engages between 3,000 and 4,000 people. It's a combination of public and private programming. And we connect and convene people that really represent a plurality of perspectives, both from the public sector and the private sector, the startup community and the traditional business community. We really, and this is what I love about the tour and I miss so much in 2020, we get to experience firsthand, we meet people where they are. We learn about their innovation, try them out firsthand, which is how we first connected in Ann Arbor a couple of years ago. And then at the end of each day, we recognize not only the power and possibility of entrepreneurship, but the reality on the ground in each city, which manifests in an early stage pitch competition where we're investing $100,000 in the winning startup. Those companies all become part of our seed fund portfolio. So that's a mouthful, but all that to say, we've traveled to nearly 45 cities since 2014 in an official tour and programmatic capacity, and have also done a lot of investing, as I mentioned, across more cities. So we've seen a lot. And in terms of what stands out, I would say first and foremost, it's brand and community. And so what does that mean? There's this phenomenon that I like to call Silicon X syndrome. So we've got Silicon Alley and Silicon Harbor and Silicon Slopes and Silicon Prairie and Silicon Beach. And I'm sure there are a bunch that I'm missing. And to me, I find that cities are often have a lot of the same characteristics as startups themselves. And so if you think of a city as a startup, what you have with this Silicon X syndrome is startup communities who are earlier stage, and like early stage startups, they may say, well, oh, I'm the Uber for X or I'm the Facebook for Y, before they actually have found the voice and the words for their own brand identity.
Yeah.
And what I found to be increasingly exciting as we've charted and tracked and partnered with communities over the years is an evolution away from Silicon X into branding that is more specific and unique to the ecosystems that celebrate the grit and the ingenuity, or perhaps a specific industry that is core to the legacy DNA of the ecosystem and the geography that that community finds itself in. And I think that evolution in branding is an incredibly powerful tool for communities to continue to increasingly lean into. And we see that happening in some really neat ways. And before I get off my soapbox, I think the one other thing I would mention on this front is community. And, in Silicon Valley, we all know that at least, pre-2020 and pre-COVID, the joke was like, you could literally get funding like walking down the street and bumping into somebody or find talent.
So like, you've never done any research ever? Sure.
Yeah, here's some money.
Here's $1 million. Do you need a little more? Yeah.
But I think the flip side of that in communities all across the country is that in a tighter knit community, you can get more access, you can get more context, and you can get more legitimate support. And so a huge part of what the ingredient, like part of the missing ingredient that we wanted to help catalyze, our fund alone is drop in the bucket. It's not going to get us there entirely, but through co-investments and partners and using a platform to just shine more of a light on the opportunity, the missing ingredient is more capital, because all the other ingredients, in our opinion, are there, whether it comes to the ideas, the corporate connections, which is a massive benefit for startup communities all across the country, given the fact that 85% of the Fortune 500 is distributed pretty robustly all across the country outside of those three main VC funding tech hubs. Talent, tremendous amount of engineering talent comes out of universities all across the country, from Central Florida all the way up to Michigan and everything in between. So I think it's a little bit of a misnomer that talent is concentrated only on the coasts. And to bring it full circle to 2020, I think we're definitely in a moment where we're seeing more talent distribution, like the shake the snow globe moment, if you will, about people not living where they need to live, but increasingly living where they want to live. And I think that's going to have dramatic downstream effects over the next 5 to 10 years that will inure to the benefit of cities all across the country.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that this morning. Just how you're starting, like a lot of times when I'm talking to people, if they're in San Francisco, normally I'm like, oh, how are things going in San Francisco, like on the show or whatever. And they'll be like, oh, actually, I'm calling you from Pennsylvania, my sister's cabin or whatever. And I'll be like, oh, and they're like, yeah, I was not going to stay with 3 kids and a dog. Riley Brennan, who I'm describing right now, in San Francisco. And like, so I'm just gonna like, we had needed more space during the thing. And I was like, that's interesting when like a lot of people have been talking, or we've had having conversations recently about like boomerang talent and how a lot of the talent that has experience scaling companies on the coasts that are from the Midwest originally, that it would be really great to kind of be able to attract them back in a more meaningful way. And I'm like, maybe now is the sneaky time to be doing that and like moving more in that direction, because like they're all like sitting in their small apartments. They're paying like, $4,000 a month for. Meanwhile, I'm like, you could have a big house for that amount over here. So yeah, that'll be interesting. I also like what you say about brand too. And I think you guys do a really good job of like actually getting to know the communities that you're going into in a meaningful way, and like spending the time to get to know people within those communities versus I think like a lot of like bus tours that you see like kind of drive around and they're like, you know, almost like the circus. They like come into town and do like a circus act and then like leave, and they're not like ingrained in the community in some particular way. And it does seem like that the branding of the local communities and like finding themselves and really has like I've noticed that a lot too in the Midwest of just like people like communities like finding their own brand and kind of like capitalizing on the assets that they have.
So. Definitely one of the, you know, I will say it's you know, to your point there, when we have historically done the tour, these 5 city 5-day tours, very intentionally, because we want to help to share the stories of these communities and these tech ecosystems, we try to make it very public. But what we don't make very public is this like 5 months of just getting to know people beforehand. And I will say that is that process of just getting to visit communities in person is a huge part of what I miss in 2020. We've obviously, you know, we were due to have our 9th tour in this past April. It's on hold, you know, until hopefully 2021 when we can reschedule it. But obviously, we have to wait until it's safe to get out there and get back on the road. And I'm so grateful that we've been doing this for so many years, because we do still feel so connected to so many communities, which is great and important, not only from an ecosystem support standpoint and leaning into to help where we can, but also to find great deals. Because at the end of the day, we are, you know, our core job is to, you know, manage the investment capital from our, you know, from our limited partners and our investors, and help connect them to the best, we think, highest value venture scale opportunities all across the country. And so we've been actively investing, you know, through COVID on that front at the seed stage. Probably done, I would say, probably about a dozen deals. We are a higher volume investment firm for the early stage, and it's great to see so many partners. I think investing as well. So certainly at the early stage, I think for great opportunities, capital continues to flow all across the country, which is important.
Yeah, we saw a lot of like pretty successful fundraisers from venture capital firms around here, like that ended just before the pandemic. So a lot of the investors in the Midwest I've seen like still be able to like keep up the cadence of the work that they're doing. So I'm like, well, at least there's that. Yeah. Okay. Just because I'm like watching the clock. I wanted to ask you, so you've started a pretty successful company or co-founded a pretty successful tech company in the past. And what advice do you have for founders, and maybe even specifically women founders who are finding it kind of like, how do they get into the investment community, just because it's not like you're seeing a ton of women investors and all of that? Like, what would your advice be?
You know, a couple things on this front. I think my first advice actually is to, as a founder, you know, be extremely confident in your expertise and your vision. Like I always tell our founders, like, don't bury the lead. And what I mean by that, when you go through a pitch deck, oftentimes you see the team slides like the last slide. And I think in particular for female founders and minority founders, where we know, and the data shows us, that there is, you know, there is implicit bias underway in the investment process for all types of investors. Like I've learned, and it's been very humbling to learn from the data, that even female investors have implicit bias when diligencing or getting to know female founders. So, you know, it's not just one-sided on that front. But in the same token, there's a balance between not burying the lead and illustrating why you are the best person to build this company and you've assembled the best team to build this company, and balancing that with never considering yourself to be the smartest person in the room, And thinking about the advice that you're getting, who you're seeking advice from, because at a certain point, too much advice from too many random people who don't necessarily have interest in your company can be counterproductive. Everyone's got an opinion. But at the same time, you also want to think twice when like half a dozen really smart people are all giving you the same type of advice. And we had that happen with our company. You know, our headline is that we were like a wellness technology company focused on the social psychology of fitness that was acquired by Beachbody. The subtext is that when we first set out, we were part of a small group of like four companies, all competing in and around the same space, actually in boutique fitness tech enablement, and ClassPass ended up being the breakout. So we didn't set out to build and to land where we landed. We actually didn't take the advice from a lot of the same people, where all of like that whole cohort of companies were getting very similar advice, and one company took it and executed on it incredibly well. And we missed the mark on that front. And so I think the other side of the coin, and maybe my final piece of advice on this front, I think from a fundraising standpoint, a pitching standpoint, I find that competitive landscape slides are typically the toughest, and they're also maybe the hardest to conceptualize and talk to people about. But at the end of the day, it is almost guaranteed that you are not going to be the only founding team, the only startup who's got this great idea of how to tackle a space. And so thinking about what it will take, whether it's a technology moat, sometimes it's actually not tech that's the moat to scaling your business. Sometimes it's brand savvy and how you not only acquire the customer, but very savvily like retain and own them. Sometimes it's actually in like the product innovation for how you productize the solution to a problem. Like we were all hammering on the same nail, but one of us really productized that solution and nailed it and ran away with it. And so there's a lot of like the competitive landscape slide is like 3-dimensional chess. And so there are a lot of different ways to approach how you think about that just from a business strategy standpoint, and also how you convey that to investors when you're trying to build that circle of champions and raise, your next round of funding to execute on your plan and scale. So much of it's execution.
Yeah. 3-dimensional chess. I can't even do 2-dimensional chess. What's going on here? I'm like, oh no. Someone on Twitter had a quick question. Geiger Encounter. Who do you feel like has the most unique or standout city brand?
Oh, great question.
You're like the favorite of my children.
It's very hard. It's very, very hard. Oh my goodness. Well,
but
I will give you what I would imagine would be an unexpected answer to this, because I think this ecosystem is not all the way there yet, but they're really on their way, and that's Birmingham. And so the way I would say, my experiences in talking to the community in Birmingham, the way that they will start a conversation is like, don't hold our last name against us, meaning Alabama, because you wouldn't necessarily think of Alabama as a red community. And so immediately with that, just from even like a storytelling and a branding standpoint, you're sort of informing your listener to say like, like, should I be expecting the unexpected here? And what does that actually mean? And there are a lot of things that are actually happening behind the scenes with an effort that actually spun up out of a Rise the Rest tour a couple of years ago, but has been led by partners from across the country and on the ground there, called Birmingham Bound, which is an effort to actually make Birmingham like a second HQ to a lot of companies from all across the country, from New York to Denver to San Francisco. And a lot of that is tied up in this, like, don't let our last name fool you dynamic, because thanks to the acquisition of a local like hometown hero, what we would call a tentpole company called Shipt, which was acquired by Target back in late 2017 for $500 million. There are now close to, I think, don't quote me on this, but like I think 1,000 people, most of whom are like young people looking to work in tech, who work for the company, still headquartered in Birmingham, and a lot of the ecosystem gets developed around that. So I wouldn't say that's the number one like brand out on the market, but that's the kind of example that I'm thinking of in my mind when I think about this.
That sounds like very interesting. I've always like thought that they seemed pretty cool, but I'm like, interesting. I like that. Okay. One question that I wanted to make sure I asked you is, you guys have been to so many communities across the US and you've really been entrenched in their startup ecosystem. What do you feel these communities can do to kind of build a more, like just seeing best practices all over the place? What do you think is the one thing that communities could do to build a more diverse and inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem? And kind of how does Revolution focus on that as part of their investment strategy?
I mean, that and COVID recovery are the two twin pillars, I think, of 2020 in ecosystem development and engagement, that like if you're not talking about it, you literally are, in some way. In a very uncool way. So I would offer two answers to this. The first is something that I learned when we were in Columbus a couple years ago, which is so powerful in its simplicity. We were at we were having a roundtable discussion with a cross section of the community, including the leaders from a local organization that supports and empowers Black founders called Black Hack. And we were having this conversation. It was like, well, what can we do to make sure there are more Black founders at the table? And the leader of Black Hack goes, well, just invite us. Like it was that simple. But that, and to me, in that simplicity was the power behind the statement, which is you have to first like be at the table. And what I have found candidly from, the work that we've done in the cities that we've traveled to is even the most well-intentioned ecosystems and communities can sometimes become a little bit more insular, unintentionally oftentimes, where it's like the same group of people having the same conversations in an echo chamber. And we all have to continuously check ourselves and our assumptions about who's in the conversation, who should be in the conversation, and who could benefit and scale and grow from just being a part of it. And so I think that intentionality is incredibly important. I think that is coupled with the evolving ongoing conversation about the difference between diversity and inclusion. Diversity is sort of the stats and inclusion is really what you do with it. And oftentimes I think what matters so much more. While we had to pause our 9th in-person tour for TBD future date against the backdrop of everything that was unfolding and the emerging and long overdue conversation that I think has been growing in our own industry. Our team took a very long and hard look this summer internally to just try to figure out what more we can do as just a very small part of this broader conversation and call to action. And so we decided to launch a virtual tour called the Rise the Rest 2020 Virtual Tour Equity Edition, which focuses exclusively on Black founders all across the country. And so I was telling Emily, I was just coming from a call. We were just closed the application. It's a $2 million pitch competition that'll happen on December 3rd virtually. And we had close to 500 applications, which just came through. So we've all been steeped in reviewing that. But the final thing I'll leave you with is that $2 million is a drop in the bucket of the bucket of funding solution that really needs to go into solving for the gross inequity in terms of funding to Black founders, far less than 1%. But this is a core principle of Rise the Rest and something that we've loved doing with all of our communities, and I think is one of the most effective things to do on a community and ecosystem level, is partnership, is to think about not just what your actions or your firm's actions can inspire, but who can you partner with? What does that look like so that 1 + 1 = 3 or 1 + 1 = 5? And so as a part of this effort, we brought on, 2 anchor partners, OHub, the Opportunity Hub out of Atlanta, whom we worked with on tour years ago, but has been a longtime leader, on the topic of funding Black founders and, racial justice for Black entrepreneurs, and Morgan Stanley's Multicultural Innovation Lab, who's our, funding partner, and they'll be matching our $1 million investment with $1 million investment of their own. And then we've got pipeline partners and close to 100 venture capital firms signed on to also take meetings with many of the founders who come through the pipeline too. So
awesome. I really like how
we'll all drop in the bucket, but we're excited. We're excited at all the momentum around the partnership.
Yeah. And I really like how you guys have such a strong brand, but I feel like the way you do your work is like to use your brand to empower and like get the message out and like get like shine light on people that might not have as strong of a brand and like all of that. And so I feel like that's really great that you guys are focusing so much on this issue, because I think that's going to get it in a lot of more people's ear that might not be paying attention. Yay. Okay. I know I'm super over time with you. So I want to thank you so much for joining. And I am super excited, and I definitely want to catch up more with you at some point. And then I want to tell everyone else that next week we have Laura Khalil on, and I'm super excited about that conversation because it's going to be the day after the election. Bum, bum, bum. So
you caught me this week before the election.
Yeah, we definitely very carefully did not put that on anybody to like, yes, and so now what do you think of what just happened yesterday? So that'll be so exciting. And I will look forward to talking to you hopefully in the near future. And I'm really interested to watch the virtual tour on December 3rd, you said.
Yep.
Cool.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks. Bye.